Hey folks, if you enjoyed my coverage of immersive puzzlers like the Simulacra series, you're in for a treat since I'm going to be talking about City from Naught's Keyword, a Spider's Thread, which is perhaps the most Canadian stab at Cyberpunk I've ever seen. But was it a well-woven web of mysteries, or did the story threads fray early on? I'm your host Arlian, let's find out together. Being a dad can be a harrowing experience at the best of times, especially when raising a teen, but for Detective Guo Chen, his greatest fears have come to pass, when an act of rebellious defiance from his daughter Sala turns from a momentary refusal to answer her phone into a pronounced silence spanning days. Met with the indifference of the Toronto PD, his only avenue is to rely on the skills he's refined through his career in order to search for any leads that might help him find her. Who she was with, why, and when, all of these questions need to be pieced together so he can hopefully figure out where she was, something that becomes more pressing with each new chilling discovery. And on the whole, I found it did a decent job of providing a suspenseful mystery. Once you're past the game's opening cutscenes and segments, its narrative largely plays out in much smaller pieces associated with each new puzzle you discover, something that actually feels fairly organic given that they're centered around cracking into people's emails or corporate databases. That and a bit of surveillance. While this does have the side effect of occasionally leaving you stranded on a certain story beat, even that wasn't necessarily a bad thing, given that often meant you had to sit and dwell on the existing narrative implications. And honestly, in respect to its content, I always found the wait to be worth it too. It provides a legitimately interesting story which kept me guessing for the entirety of the journey. Though the path to the secret ending is a complete nightmare, since if you aren't clever enough to guess one part of the journey, you'll be locked behind a QR code puzzle that's an absolute nightmare to engage with. Though, by that same measure, it's also loaded with fairly unique conundrums which make pursuing it worthwhile. Which, yeah, this is about as good as a point as any to branch over to gameplay, and well, it is an interesting game. Largely, how I describe it is an immersive breach of privacy simulator, as you'll have to slowly figure out how to gradually gain access to people's social media accounts and emails by piecing together contextual clues from websites, other emails, and even elements scattered about the environment. It's certainly inventive, though there are times where it almost feels like a hidden object game. Also, I gotta say there is one puzzle that legitimately bothered me, if only because it made Guo look like an absolutely terrible father. Specifically, at one point he has to crack into one of Sala's accounts. Here's the thing though, the password is locked behind her birthday. You know that date he should intrinsically know? Like, I have a horrible memory, I have a terrible one. But this definitely feels like a bit of a failure as a father moment, especially when she was living with him. And while I'm aware I should apply some suspension of disbelief for the sake of puzzle logic, days later this still sticks with me. It's just a hell of a thing. Even still though, there are a lot of elements that the game does get right. For instance, while I generally enjoyed the puzzles, a facet that I really liked was that the game has a built-in notepad. Considering that I'm normally filling out a journal while playing these sort of games, this was a quality of life feature that I absolutely appreciated. What's more, while you can get stumped on puzzles, you generally have a pair of routes that you can fiddle with, allowing you to take a break from a troublesome lead in favor of another, so that you can clear your head out and maybe make some mechanical and even narrative progress to boot, so you're not just left dwelling and thinking with no avenue available to you. But yeah, on the whole, it is relatively simple, which means I can switch gears to aesthetics, and notably its visuals. Admittedly, the scope of what you can see does feel somewhat limited, given that, save for a few exceptions, you're confined to the protagonist's apartment due to a curfew. And yet, it works. His apartment manages to provide an organic space to explore, with clues that don't feel out of place. Even the small scroll pieces that serve as lore feel right at home. I'll also admit a fondness for the concept of a futuristic Toronto. There's something grandiose about it, like a more Canadian New York that's been slightly amplified, and yet it also carries a sense of isolation and disconnect that feels like an extension of where things are going. When you order food, it's not through a delivery person, but a drone service. In fact, you can even watch the drones going to and fro along their routes, which can actually be used to your advantage. It's neat. And when the game does decide to provide something different, it doesn't disappoint. But what about the sound design? Well, my feelings on that are a bit more mixed. Now, voice acting wise, I do think it does an admirable enough job, but when it comes to the music, it's a bit more hit and miss. Though, not because of the quality of the tracks, but rather because the game is largely ambient, which can make the way its tracks are implemented feel a bit jarring. What's more, while they can certainly feel apropos to the situation, the fact that you can peel out or trigger a theme while in the middle of something else means you can inadvertently cause some disjointed sequences only for things to fade back to the relative silence of the city. It's odd. Still, I don't think it detracts heavily from the ultimate experience. In fact, it's safe to say I quite like Keyword. Admittedly, this is largely a narrative experience. If you're good with puzzle games, it's entirely possible to tear through its content in relatively short order. That said, I had a load of fun doing just that. The puzzles feel good to tease out the solution when it clicks, and there's something altogether clever about how it makes use of the limited space it provides you. Oh, and if you are stuck, it does provide a fairly comprehensive hint system to poke at, which provides tiered clues so you don't necessarily spoil a solution in one go. Frankly, if you've seen any of my reviews of Kagan Games' Simulacra series and enjoyed them mechanically, I feel Keyword or Spider's Thread would likely click for you. So yeah, I think I can safely call this a bite-sized hit, even if there are some times where it feels like its forward momentum can hit some speed bumps. And the opening theme is absolute fire, like peak old school detective theme. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you have something to say, leave a comment, and if you appreciate my efforts to create new indie reviews and interviews, hit subscribe and the bell. For a link to my Discord, the Crit Hit Cauldron, check the description. There's also a link to my Patreon where you can support me and unlock neat perks like seeing reviews early or getting your name read in the credits like Greenwich Babby, Andy Noted, and Shrimp Mania. And to my merch house for neat swag like Crit Hit coffee mugs. That said, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.